Hey, welcome back to Political Buzz. Recently, our friends at the law firm of Hodgson Russ in Buffalo welcomed former counselor to President Clinton, lawyer, crisis manager, and contributor to Fox News, Lanny Davis, to Buffalo. He's the author of a new book. It's called Crisis Tales, with 5 rules for coping with crisis in business, politics, and life.
The good news is that the truth matters, and that if you're in a personal crisis involving friend, spouse, companion, if you're in a business crisis where you think your reputation is threatening your entire business, whatever it is, the truth matters. And the sooner you can get the truth out, as painful as it is, the object is to get it behind you so you can move on with your life. And that's the lesson. Rather than preaching that lesson, I tell true stories, starting out with the telephone call with the person who's in trouble, and then I do a kind of a whodunit as I go through the story, what happened and how did I figure it out? How did I get it wrong? I write one chapter about myself where I made all the mistakes I tell people not to write. And the book is a teaching book, but not through teaching, through telling true stories.
When you were with President Clinton, you were the counsel there for special counsel to President Clinton, 96 to 98. What was it like to arguably have to sit down with the most powerful man in the world and tell him what to say and how to say it, or what to do and how to do it? How did that work?
Well, the truth is I didn't do that very much. As good as I think I can be sometimes, I'm an apprentice to the master of all masters. For me to give President Clinton advice on what to say and how to say it, he's the best I've ever seen in politics. There was a moment when I was about to leave where he was unable to be Bill Clinton, and that's when he had the episode with Ms. Lewinsky. And I was unable to advise him on that subject because that's a subject involving human weakness, where his first priority had to be to make peace at home. And as I've written in many places, that's the one subject that's hard to do, crisis management, to tell somebody you have to tell the truth to a wife, a friend, a companion who you've hurt. But that's the major issue, is contrition and telling the truth. But what I did for President Clinton was, on his behalf, I got a lot of nasty stories written ahead of time, so by the time the Republicans held hearings on national television in the summer of 1997, I would circulate the stories that had already been written on the subject of the hearing, and I would tell the reporters, old news, been there, done that. This is boring, and it worked. At one point, Senator Fred Thompson went on to become famous through Law and Order, but then was senator from Tennessee, the chairman of the proceedings, said to me, today we're going to discuss a topic that even Lanny Davis won't say is old news. Then I knew I'd succeeded.
And those issues with the president at that time were campaign financing and
Yes.
financial issues?
Almost entirely about fundraising, sometimes not so beautiful to look at, but nothing to do with Ms. Lewinsky. I was on my way out the last 10 days when that story broke.
I would suspect a lot of politicians, unfortunately, would have liked to come to you, and maybe they did, when they had other incidents in their own personal life, and maybe you advise them the same way. It seems like, of all the things, that's like here locally, there was a local politician who was brought down by a scandal, suspected scandal, Chris Lee. So so you just advise them to get their own personal house in order first?
First of all, the contrition has to be authentic. You can't make it up, not for a second. People know when you're saying, I'm sorry, but, and then the but takes over. And secondly, people who judge someone who's going through that kind of a crisis better beware, because I do believe in the expression, people who live in glass houses shouldn't throw stones there, but for the grace of God. It's very hard to be a crisis manager to advise somebody who's going through that, except to say, make peace with yourself, make peace at home, everything else is secondary.
You seem to be a Renaissance man, Lenny, in so many ways, because of the firm that you started. And how did you get involved in this to say, not only counsel people, but also advise them in crisis management?
I never planned this, because what I do is so conflicted that if I said I want to do this, people would say, no, that's impossible. I have a law degree, and when I'm talking to a client, I'm 100% privileged. On the other hand, I've come from a political background, and I know that in politics you want to get the truth out quickly and get the story over with. Now those two things are in conflict, because lawyers don't like to talk to the media. They don't like to volunteer bad facts. When I was at the Clinton White House, there would be times where a reporter was writing a bad story, hadn't gotten to the really worst fact of all, and I would kind of coax the reporter to ask me the right question. Now, why would I do that? I was defending my client. Why would I do that? Because that bad fact, if it's left out of the story, is coming out in another story and another story. So what I want to do is get one story written, everything good and bad, my viewpoint expressed, over. And that's the mission that, unfortunately, lawyers aren't helpful because they don't want to do that. They're trained not to do that.
How would you advise President Obama in the gun control issue? He's lobbying hard. The Republicans are, and in some respect the NRA, lobbying. A very polarizing issue right now in America. How would you advise him to get over that?
You know, he had a point the other day at the press conference. He can only do so much. You can't force people to vote nowadays or ever. I think there's a style of leadership that he ought to try, which is to get out in front early, in person, one at a time. Who am I thinking about? Bill Clinton. How did Bill Clinton balance the budget with Newt Gingrich? They didn't like each other. He left behind $1 trillion surplus because he knew that there was some common ground. But he had to really work at it, and it was not easy. Another one I think of is Lyndon Johnson. He would go up to the Senate, up to the House, have a little office in an anteway, and one at a time, what do you need? What can I do? And the final example is if your audience has seen the movie Lincoln. True story, President of the United States goes out at night. Now he'd be surrounded by Secret Service nowadays, and what does he do? He knocks on the door of a member of the House and asks for his support for the 13th Amendment. I think President Obama now finally is trying to do that. They call it the charm offensive. I'd rather call it leadership. But it may be a little late in the day. I hope he runs for history now because he doesn't have to run for re-election.
Oh, so much there. Let's talk a little bit about social media and how that's impacted what people like you do, what people like us in the media do. It's instant. It's on Twitter. You make comment in one of the articles I read. When it's out there, and then it's in Google and it's fast. How has that changed?
It's powerfully positive in allowing individuals to communicate to mass audiences without going through the establishment, the mainstream media, or any other filter. And it's powerfully destructive because people who use it for evil purposes, to put smears out, distortions out, and hide behind anonymity. So it's a vehicle for the spread of hate, and it's a vehicle for the spread of liberating democracy, as we saw with the Arab Spring. I write about this in my last chapter, which is why I appear so energized in discussing the social media, good and bad. And I liken it to a swarm of bees when you're being attacked. If there's a lie on the social media, it spreads so quickly, it's like having a swarm of bees around your head. And it did happen to me. And you can swat at them, and what happens? They just get madder, and they keep swarming. So the only answer is to develop your own swarm of truth, so that the search engine picks up your truth while it's also picking up the misinformation. But it's a dangerous tool, and sooner or later we're going to have to get our arms around how do we get people to channel their anger and channel their attacks to more constructive comments on Twitter and elsewhere.
When we take a look now at your visit here to Western New York, it's with our friends here at Hodgson Russ, a prominent law firm here in town, and you worked on a case, the Rentway case, and without getting maybe too deep into it, an individual was accused of fraud, basically, and you said, I'm going to set up shop, bring the Securities Exchange Commission right into the office, and eventually it was cleared.
One of the great good things I've ever done in my life, this is a great and good man, Bill Morgenstern, who built a little business, friend of Tom Ridges, who was then congressman, and suddenly he found $120 million of invented revenues. And how could that be? He was a hands-on executive of a public company. And so he looked like he was guilty. And being a lawyer, I was able to get to the truth. If I were just a public relations firm, and I have many great friends who were public relations consultants, I couldn't have done that job because I would have been forced to testify under oath as a public relations consultant. As an attorney, I have something called attorney-client privilege, like confessing to a priest. There's no power on earth that can force the priest to testify what he's heard in a confession booth. When it came to Bill Morgenstern of Rentway, I and John Zach and Bob Lane and Dan Oliverio of Hodgson Russ independently, talking, spending time, reading documents, interviewing, all to decide whether Bill Morgenstern was telling the truth. We all came to the conclusion he's telling the truth. Now we've got to save him to get the truth out. And that's what we did, and we saved him literally and his company for at least a while before it was sold.
One more question. How does a Democrat become an analyst on Fox News? You must have a good friendship with the great Roger Ailes.
I do. And
One of my heroes.
Very insightful that you would even think of that, because it's so incongruous. So who could I disagree with more on almost everything in politics than Roger Ailes? And yet this is a really kind, great man. I decided to work for Fox News because of Roger Ailes, because he gave me an opportunity to speak to an audience that Democrats aren't talking to. Why it makes sense to go on another cable station where everybody watching agrees with me, I have no idea.
Makes sense.
But why talk to people who agree with me? I want to persuade people who are willing to listen to me, and the Fox audience is more independent, and I find a lot more capability to a large audience to maybe change a few minds.
Well, we'll see you hopefully back in Western New York and in Buffalo soon. And the book is Crisis Tales, 5 Rules for Coping with Crisis in Business, Politics, and Life. It's available everywhere. We encourage everybody to go pick it up.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks
Thank
you,
you
Lanny
very much.
Davis. Thank you.